This is the Asus Chromebook CX15, and it is one of the least expensive laptops you can buy right now. We're talking $159 on Walmart MSRP. But all this begs the question, what is the catch here? $160 is an insanely low price for a new 15-inch laptop. So surely there must be something that is wrong with it. And indeed, there are some serious limitations to this laptop, but whether those limitations matter to you depend a lot on why exactly you would buy an inexpensive laptop like this. So let's take a closer look. Now, one reason you might buy a laptop that's inexpensive is because you just really don't care that much about the laptop's overall design. And if that's you, well, this laptop is actually going to more than over-deliver. You could easily spend $500 or $600 on another laptop and end up with something that doesn't really feel much more premium than the Asus Chromebook CX15. And there are a few reasons for this. First, starting with the basic look and feel of it, Asus doesn't try to do anything fancy here. It is a plastic laptop with a silver finish, and that's a classic look. When you open the laptop up, you will of course notice that it doesn't have the premium feel and rigidity of something that's made out of aluminum, but actually it doesn't feel too bad. When moving the display back and forth, there isn't as much flex as you would expect. In fact, just looking at it, moving it up and down, I don't see a lot of visible flex in that display lid. The lower chassis is the same. You can take this laptop, pick it up off a table with one hand at one corner. It actually feels like a fairly solid and rigid laptop without any noticeable flex of any kind. And then we get to what I think is the real star of the show, which is the keyboard. The Asus Chromebook CX15 has a large keyboard with a numpad, and while it's not remarkable, the overall key travel, the layout, and the tactile feel of the keys is perfectly fine. It's actually rather enjoyable. I typed out thousands of words on this laptop and had no complaints, and in particular, I was able to type at high speeds without any noticeable problem. The touchpad perhaps is one of the weaknesses. It's not particularly large, measuring a little under 5 by 3 inches. Not a lot of room there, and obviously you look at the surface of the laptop, there could have been a larger touchpad there. But then again, for $160, I mean, this touchpad is basically the same size as most laptops that are $400, $500, $600. In terms of overall feel and function, it's hard to mark a difference between this and laptops that are several times more expensive. My only real beef with the design, and something that you should note if you decide to buy this Asus Chromebook CX15, is that the port selection is relatively limited. It's not too bad. You do have a USB-C, which is used to charge the laptop. You also have a full-sized HDMI, a USB-A port, and a 3.5mm combo audio jack, which covers a lot of bases. However, you don't get 2 USB-A ports, and all the ports are found on the left side of the laptop, so if you generally connect things to the right side of your laptop, that can be a little bit annoying. Also, all the USB ports, including the USB-C port, are limited to 5 gigabytes per second data, but given the laptop's performance, which I will get to here in a bit, I have a hard time imagining why you would need higher data rates on this Chromebook, so I don't think that's a big problem. Another major win here, and I really mean a major win, is the display. This $160 laptop ships with a 15.6-inch 1080p display, and it's fine. And I do mean fine. It's not especially bright, and the viewing angles aren't amazing, and the color gamut is certainly nowhere near what you're going to get with a more expensive IPS LCD or OLED laptop, of course. But as a display, well, I mean, it's functional. It is bright enough to use in most indoor environments, and 1080p resolution, well, that's really something to note at the $160 price point. If you go on Amazon right now and you look at the listings of laptops that are at that price point, you're going to find that a surprising number of them do not have a 1080p display. There's a lot of 1366 by 768 that is still lurking out in the market. A lot of times those are older laptops that have been priced down over time. And let me tell you, buying a laptop that has a sub 1080p resolution in 2025 is an absolute no-go, even at $160. The fact that this laptop has the 1080p display is a huge advantage, and it immediately marks the Asus Chromebook CX15 as a serious, possibly usable option at $160. While the alternative laptops, if they don't have a 1080p display, in my opinion, that's basically just e-waste. It's not usable in 2025. You should not consider it under any circumstances at any price. Now, this laptop I'm talking about here is the Asus Chromebook CX15, but to be specific, it is the CX1505CKA. it's important to take note of that model number because there are other Asus Chromebook CX15 models and they may have very different specifications. So make sure you take note of that model number. Now, if you buy this particular Asus Chromebook CX15, you're going to get an Intel Celeron N4500 processor that has 2 cores, 1.1 gigahertz base clock up to 2.8 gigahertz. Now, that is not a lot of cores, but as Chromebooks go, this processor is not that bad. Basically, this is going to put your performance level a little bit greater than most of the MediaTek powered Chromebooks, but it's going to be towards the low end of an Intel Chromebook. It's worth noting that in the world of Chromebooks, you do see a lot of performance gains as you go up the product stack. The $160 Chromebooks like this Asus Chromebook CX15 are only really fast enough in terms of processor performance to handle basic web browsing, maybe a little bit of very light photo editing. But if you jump up to something like an Asus Chromebook Plus CX34, which is $400 and has an Intel Core i5 1335U, you're going to be seeing somewhere between 2 and possibly up to 3 times better performance depending on the task. Also keep in mind that the Intel Celeron series has the bare bones bottom barrel Intel integrated graphics, and that actually makes a really big difference. You can basically run nothing in terms of 3D games or applications on the Chromebook CX15. Of course, on the other hand, I don't know that you would really expect the laptop to handle any serious 3D workloads because there isn't really a lot of serious 3D games for a Chromebook. Any 3D games that you would be playing seriously would probably be through a cloud service like GeForce Now, and I didn't notice any issue when using GeForce Now at 1080p resolution. And that brings us to what I actually think is the most serious performance limitation, and that's the RAM. You only get 4 gigabytes of RAM here, which is not a lot for any laptop in 2025. Now again, given the price, I guess that's kind of fair. 4 gigabytes, $160. I mean, sure, you're generally going to have to pay at least twice as much to get 8 gigabytes of RAM. But the thing about RAM is that when you don't have enough, you don't have enough. You start to experience some very serious performance issues. And unfortunately, that oftentimes can be the case with the Asus Chromebook CX15. Even when browsing Chrome OS. Here, I'll put up some B-roll of me navigating Chrome OS and opening a few browser tabs on this laptop, and as you can see, the performance is not super smooth. It's fine in most cases, but as I open more browser tabs and start to do more things, you'll notice that the interface hitches and slows down noticeably. I think on the whole, this is a laptop for people who have no more than half a dozen browser tabs open at once. If you exceed that, then you're going to probably run into trouble. Now, actually, personally, I'm one of those weirdos who oftentimes does close their browser tabs, so I usually don't have more than 4 or 5 browser tabs open at once, but I know that's not really the norm for most people. Also, this has 128 gigabytes of eMMC storage, very slow. Of course, this is not really meant to be a laptop where you store a lot of things on the laptop itself or transfer large files, so I don't see it being a big issue, and in fact, it's kind of nice it has 128 gigabytes, which you might not expect at $160. At this price point, you can find Chromebooks that have only 64 gigabytes of storage. Still, that's something to keep in mind, and it's also going to contribute to slow performance when you run out of RAM, since anything you access off of that slow eMMC storage is going to take a while to load up. And what about battery life? Well, in general, you're going to get about 10 hours or less with this laptop, which might seem a bit surprising given that it has an Intel Celeron N4500 processor, which isn't exactly quick. However, the laptop also has a 42 watt-hour battery, which is not very large at all. In fact, this might be the smallest battery I've tried in any laptop in about a year. Perhaps the only upside here is that because the processor is so slow, in my experience, there's not a lot of big swings in the battery life depending on what you're doing. I think the most significant thing you can do to drain the battery is probably to crank the brightness of the 1080p display all the way up. But even then, I think you're generally going to expect 7 or 8 hours in a worst case scenario. I do think it's worth mentioning, keeping in mind that this level of battery life, although it's definitely not spectacular, about 10 hours of battery life is still pretty good. It means you're probably only going to need to charge the laptop every day, even if you're a heavy user, so that's not really a huge downside. Now, with all this said, should you buy the Asus Chromebook CX15? Well, this is kind of the minimum viable laptop that I would recommend. This laptop at $160, basically, it does laptop things. And what do I mean by that? Well, you can open up this laptop, turn it on, browse the web, do some emails, watch some YouTube, play some games through a game streaming service, do some research for whatever project it is that you're dreaming up. Basically, if it's something that works best with a keyboard and a touchpad and a nice big display, then this is going to be a pretty good option for it. Where, of course, this Asus Chromebook CX15 falls short, and in anything that requires a more demanding level of performance. If you want to edit photos, if you want to edit video, if you want to play games locally on your laptop. None of these are going to really be possible on the Asus Chromebook CX15. Even people who do a lot of multitasking in a web browser are going to quickly find the limits of the 4 gigabytes of RAM, as you will experience hesitations and slow down once you have 6 or 7 browser tabs open. Now, that might not seem like high praise, but it all really depends on how you use your laptop. I know that for me, this wouldn't really work out, but there are a lot of people out there who really view a laptop as kind of an accessory to their phone or their tablet. They primarily use those devices when they want to enjoy entertainment, and they really only turn to the laptop when they need a keyboard. If that sounds like you, the Asus Chromebook CX15 could work out rather well. Now, I have my full review of this laptop up on PC World, and I'll have that link to that in the description. It includes more benchmarks, and you will find more commentary on the laptop on some aspects of it I didn't mention here, like for example the webcam and microphone. Opinions on this I know can vary quite a bit depending on what your needs are and even where you live in the world. So I'd be eager to hear what you think about the possibility of buying this sort of laptop as opposed to something that might be like a $400 Windows alternative. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.